Hey, this is Jeff Ratcliffe here. Let's talk about the value in daily fantasy for a minute. The big prizes, yeah, they're attractive, but you have to finish in the top 2% out of thousands of experts to win any real money. So even on your best day, you still feel like you're losing. Now you can play something better. Stat Hero. Stat Hero is a house-based game that combines the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools. Each Stat Hero contest lasts multiple days, but requires only one entry fee, so your money lasts longer. Yes, you can play multiple days with only one entry fee. Stat Hero gives you a smaller contest and more chances to win, and no more competing with sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. Survive the game and download Stat Hero today and see how the face of daily fantasy has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us. Stat Hero now open for NFL and NBA. For more information, please visit stathero.com.
You kidding me? Playoffs?
What is up? It's the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe, and it is Monday, January 27th. And yes, we are officially in Super Bowl week. But I'd be lying to you if I said that my mind isn't elsewhere today, as a lot of other folks are in the same situation. The news of Kobe Bryant's passing, shocking, devastating, unbelievable, truly unbelievable. I tell you what, for me, the whole career arc of Kobe Bryant always resonated pretty significantly because he went to high school in the Philadelphia area where I grew up. I didn't play basketball against Kobe Bryant. I'd love to have that story. But I did get to see him play at Lower Merion High School when I was in high school. He graduated a year before I did. And then to see him go on to the NBA and do what he did when not being picked first overall was remarkable. And did he have bumps along the way? Yes, he did. Of course he did. We make mistakes. I've said it many times on this podcast. I made a lot of mistakes in my lifetime. That doesn't mean we can't redeem ourselves. And Kobe was doing some really great things. I actually saw my friend Dana Jacobson over at CBS post a profile that she did on Kobe. I think it was in November. It wasn't too long ago. And some of the stuff that he was doing with children's books and obviously the stuff that he was doing with his own family, it was pretty remarkable that he was using his platform in that good way. And, of course, he was tremendous on the court. It's a very, very sad day for a lot of folks involved here. Thoughts, prayers, positive vibes going out to everybody impacted. And certainly, as a lot of people are saying, and rightfully so, don't take anything for granted because you're not guaranteed anything. Nobody's guaranteed anything. So just wanted to say, obviously, Kobe doesn't have anything to do with this podcast or anything, but one of the biggest stories we've seen in sports and saddest stories we've seen in sports in a very, very, very long time. The good news, though, is that we do have some things to take our minds off of this. And I know we're not going to fully take our mind off of it, but it is Super Bowl week, and that is a good thing. So on today's pod, in a little bit, I'm going to break down an initial preview of the matchups in this contest. Just giving us an overall sense. We'll work through this week. There's a lot to do this week, obviously, for DFS purposes, for betting purposes, and even one and done. I mean, hey, it does seem relatively straightforward, but if you have Kelsey, if you have Kittle, well, which one do you choose, right? If you have Mahomes and Jimmy G, I mean, it's probably Mahomes, let's be honest. But what about the backfield? There's a lot of somewhat not so obvious things that we have to discuss this week for even one and dones. But wanted to dive into some of the recent news items here. Of course, this past weekend was the NFL Pro Bowl, and we saw Lamar Jackson doing it again in the Pro Bowl. I mean, hey, the Pro Bowl is what it is, and, we can make fun of it. I'm not a huge fan of the game itself. In fact, I did even put out a Twitter poll, asking, what's better, the game, the All-Star game, or the skills competition? Whatever major sport you're talking about, do you like the dunk contest, the three-point contest more than the game? Probably, right? Do you like the home run derby more than the game? Probably. We just had the NHL skills better than the game. I mean, if of any All-Star game, maybe the NHL All-Star game is the best. But just seeing some of the fun that these guys were having in the Pro Bowl week, the dodgeball game with Jarvis Landry. Now tell me that wasn't freaking awesome, right? And it did look like about 85% of people, last I checked, was about 85% of people would prefer just the skills and not the game itself. But anyway, Lamar Jackson, 2 passing scores. We did see a lot of Mark Andrews in this one. 9 catches from Mark Andrews. DJ Chark continuing to show major upside. By the way, there was a little blurb out there on DJ Chark. Of course, we do have a different offensive coordinator in there coming in with Jay Gruden this next season. But he doesn't anticipate his role to change much. We'll see. It's a different offense for sure. But I think that Jay Gruden is smart enough to realize what he has in DJ Chark, and he's going to use him. DJ Chark, really one of the biggest breakouts, and surprise breakouts at that, this year. So kudos to him. The AFC taking this one down. Not a lot of run game in this one. Even from Lamar. Lamar only had 6 yards. So, yeah, it wasn't a ground and pound type of a day, as typically we see in these Pro Bowl contests. On the other side, Devontae Adams scored twice, a cool tribute to Kobe and one of his touchdowns. Michael Thomas, he's awesome. 5 for 92 and a touchdown. It's just like, doesn't matter what week, he's going to put up good numbers. Cooper got in the end zone. Kenny Galladay also went over a buck. He led all receivers in receiving yards. Anyway, it was the Pro Bowl. It came, it went. But also the Senior Bowl came and went. And we did have boots on the ground. Our PFF team was down there in Mobile. And a lot of great insight, a lot of great content over at PFF.com. I highly recommend going and checking it out. And while you're there, you might as well get a subscription. See what I did there. PFF30 is the promo code. 30% off. That's pretty darn good. If you wanted Elite, that's $60 off of Elite. $60 is going to buy you a lot of cups of coffee. Anyway, head on over there. Take in all of the Senior Bowl content. Really phenomenal. And our free agency rankers, freaking awesome. I almost cursed to say how good it was. Freaking awesome. I love it. All the information you can get there. So go check that out. But the only thing I have here, we'll get into rookies. I'm not going to do rookies until next week, and then we'll really start attacking it. But Justin Herbert was named the MVP. He stood out in practices. He helped his draft stock. There's no doubt about it. I don't think the question was whether or not he would be a first rounder. I think the question is, where does he go in that first round? And now I'm sure we're going to see him pushing up boards. Would it absolutely shock anyone if he was a top 10 pick? No, I don't think he's going to go in that range in a lot of mock drafts, but it is the NFL, and we've seen guys fly up the board at quarterback, and he certainly has a skill set that would be appealing to a lot of NFL teams. So anyway, good on him there. Of course, we have free agency coming up as well. Just mentioned the free agency ranker, so check that out, PFF.com. But we have some really interesting quarterbacks. This is one of the most fascinating free agency periods in my memory, and a big part of it is the two elder statesmen at the quarterback position, Tom Brady and Drew Brees. Robert Kraft talking about Tom Brady to TMZ Sports. This is where we are. It's 2020. Biff has the copy of Gray's Sports Almanac. I'm 100% convinced that is what's happening. We are on the alternate timeline, all right? And so Kraft told TMZ that the plan is to certainly bring Tom Brady back. Now, of course, you could say that now, and it doesn't happen. We shall see. There's a lot of moving parts here. Moving parts with Phillip Rivers as well. I'm not mentioning him in this group, but he is a part of this group, per se, because if he ends up going elsewhere, if he ends up going to Indy, if he ends up going to Tampa, that's an interesting landing spot for Brady. I highly doubt Brees would go back there. Boy, wouldn't that be something? Full circle, but I highly doubt that. In terms of Brees, now last week he did say he has no plans of leaving New Orleans, but he also did say right before the Pro Bowl that he's going to take about a month or so before making any decision. Now, when he says it like that, of course, the door now is open for retirement. Retirement is not out of the question. I mean, we saw Eli Manning, obviously he realized he wasn't going to get a starting job elsewhere, so he retired. Could Brees get a starting job elsewhere? Yeah, I think he could. I think he absolutely could as a bridge. To get a long-term deal at this point, you're not going to get a long-term deal. But, as a bridge, as a guy who could be under center for a couple more seasons, absolutely. But is that what he wants to do? I mean, we don't know the answers to these questions. We don't know if New Orleans ultimately wants to keep him. Do they want to keep Teddy? Do they want to keep Taysom? Like, what do they want to do? We really don't know, and that's what makes this even more fascinating, especially for fantasy purposes as well. There's going to be a lot of ripple effect here. With Brady as well, but maybe more so with Brees than any other quarterback. It's a fascinating period of time here. Anyway, one other quick note, and this happened right before I hit record on the pod. Browns hiring former Eagles VP of Football Ops Andrew Berry for their general manager and executive vice president of football operations. Andrew Berry is young. He is 32 years old. Andrew Berry is a very interesting name who obviously, the Eagles have done some very good things in the post-Chip Kelly era, and a lot of that has been due to what Howie Roseman has done for that team. Andrew Berry was able to work very closely with Howie Roseman. This is a smart move. This is a very smart move for Cleveland. We've seen Cleveland screw it up before. I'm sorry, Browns fans, but it's true. We've seen them screw it up before. This has the feeling like they're not going to screw it up. Now, it's still very early on, but this has that feeling here. We'll see. Anyway, I want to talk about these matchups for the Super Bowl, but before we do, I got to tell you about another one of our sponsors for today, Thrive Fantasy. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy for the big game. That's #prop up. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports app for player props. I love me some player props. They've eliminated the need to do countless hours of research because they only ask you about the top tier athletes in their respective sports. Choose 10 out of the 20 player prop options to build your lineup. And each prop has a fantasy point total associated with the over or the under based on its likelihood to occur. That's the cool part about this game. The more points a selection is worth, obviously, the riskier it is. Rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. Thrive has over $20,000 guaranteed for the big game between the 49ers and Chiefs and a $500 free roll. Use the promo code PFF when you sign up today, and you'll receive an instant match up to $25 on your first deposit. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store or Play Store by visiting their website, www. Do we still have to say www? .thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop up today. It's pretty cool stuff. I love some player props. Love me those player props. Also, love me this game. Now, last week on Friday's pod, I went over some of the fun props, the national anthem and all that fun stuff. And I know that some of you Rat Packers certainly appreciated the hard-hitting Demi Lovato analysis. I'm not going to do any of that today, and I promise I will not do that ever again. Well, at least with Demi Lovato. I'll probably talk about the national anthem next year, but I can guarantee she's not going to be doing it. That I can guarantee. Anyway, in terms of this game itself, we're still not seeing much movement on the Vegas line. So I'll keep coming back to this through the week because if we see any other movement, it'll be interesting. Here's what we're at. We're still at -1. However, the over-under has bumped up just a tick. We're now at 54.5. We were at 54 at open, and I have seen William Hill and I think a couple other books have it at 55. So that movement suggesting that the public money, not the sharp money, but the public money is starting to go on the over. That makes sense. If this keeps going up and up, I'm not willing to play it just yet. But if we see 55.5, if we see 56, I am hammering the under because we're getting a good price there. Anyway, that's where we are with that. We'll come back to that, like I said, on Wednesday and on Friday. We'll revisit everything. But I want to set the stage here for this game from a matchup standpoint, just like we do every single week. And when we're looking at this I mean, if you're already starting to think about your one and dones, we'll talk about that as well. But just generally speaking, where are the upgrades? Where are the downgrades? How do we attack this game? On the San Francisco side, if we're looking to get an upgrade, we actually have two nice opportunities. We do have the opportunity of the backfield. We know that Kansas City struggles against running backs, almost 4.9 yards per carry against the Chiefs this season. Did it work for Tennessee? No, it didn't. But early on, you have to admit, you did, maybe like I did, think, Derrick Henry's going to do it again early in the game. Once they got down, they couldn't do what they wanted to do with Derrick Henry, and we saw how that worked out. But you saw that he was able to run against him early. So the question, first and foremost, where do we stand with Tevin Coleman, right? Because that's going to be a big factor in terms of a lot of different things we do. I'm not even looking at Raheem Mostert betting lines at this point. I'm not really worried about that yet because I want to get clarity with Tevin Coleman. So what we know from last week, DNPs all 3 days. Don't really care about that. We won't get a sense if he's trending towards playing until at least Wednesday, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see another DNP. Could he go DNP, and still play? Maybe, but I highly doubt it. If he goes DNP, LP, could he play? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And especially if he gets the full practice FP on Friday, he's going to play. So we'll keep an eye on that one, but that really will impact what we do because I know that a lot of folks are going to just immediately go to Raheem Mostert because of last week. But those same folks immediately went to Tevin Coleman last week because of the week before. And let's not do the recency bias thing. If both guys are playing, both guys are healthy enough to play, they're going to split touches. There's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see what we saw last week to start the game, and that is a rotation of series. And if that is the case, they're going to cannibalize off of each other, and you really almost have to guess right as to which one of these guys gets the work in the red zone, because it could be either of them. Now, if it were me, yes, I probably still do lean towards Mostert because he has just more bang for your buck from a big play ability. But we saw it. It wasn't that long ago that we saw Tevin Coleman put up a big game as well. Just 2 games ago, and he put up a big game. So it's a great matchup, but we're going to circle back to this one later in the week. Now, the other great matchup here, though, is George Kittle. Now, I'll say this, though. Kansas City has allowed the 3rd most receptions to tight ends in the regular season. I think I said that stat last week. So there's a lot of catches potentially on the table. And that has translated to a favorable fantasy matchup. No doubt about it. Favorable fantasy matchup. I mean, when we go over to the matchup charts over at PFF.com, right now it's the number 5 matchup for tight ends. It's a favorable matchup. That being said, who is covering Kittle? Well, most likely Honey Badger. And that's not that great. So I don't want to get completely carried away here. I actually think that, believe it or not, even though the fantasy points say, okay, San Francisco's facing the number 5 matchup, whereas Kansas City's facing the 6th worst matchup, that means in a one and done, you absolutely have to play Kittle. I don't think that's the case. I actually think I don't mind the matchup for Kelsey, and I'll tell you exactly why. How do you attack this San Francisco defense? Are you going to do it by, chucking the ball downfield, going after the corners in coverage? Hell no. That is not how you're going to do it. What you're going to do is probably pretty darn similar to what we saw out of Kansas City in the divisional round. They attacked the short and intermediate, and they did so with Kelsey and with Damien Williams. In the passing game, especially with Kelsey. Now, granted, Damien Williams, he had the 2 catches, but he did have 6 targets in that game. So a lot of targets for him. I think that's where you see, even though, so it's not, quote-unquote, a good matchup, I think they're going to attack the cover 3 in this one. And when we look on the season, this 49ers defense using cover 3 over a third of the time defensively. So they're using a lot of cover 3. Cover 3 means you're going to get the short and intermediate. Attack it. I think we're going to see a lot of Kelsey in this one. I really do. If I have both of them, I'm using Kelsey. I get it. Some people may say, all right, matchup, I'm using Kittle. And I may end up being wrong. But I'm playing what I think here from this analysis, and that means Kelsey in a one and done if I have them both. I like that I have both options, though. That's always a good thing. Other than that, is this a good matchup really anywhere else? Not necessarily, no. Nothing really to get too excited about. So lots of downgrades, as you would expect in the Super Bowl. Looking at the wideouts, okay, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, it's the fourth worst matchup in terms of receiving yards per game for wide receivers. San Francisco obviously does a great job. And where they've really been effective in terms of fantasy points is against slot receivers. Fifth fewest fantasy points per game to opposing slot receivers. So if you look at Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins, where do they line up? 54% of Hill's routes this season have come out of the slot. Sammy's 56%. Now remember, Hill missed some time there, so Sammy was getting extra time in the slot when Hill was sidelined. But they're both going to be out of the slot a bunch. That puts a damper on both of them. And, of course, Sammy Watkins clearly way behind Tyreek Hill. What I at least like about Tyreek Hill is on the season, he was targeted on 1/4 of his routes, a 25% target rate. That's a high number right there. And he had the highest fantasy points per route run of any wideout in this game, 0.53 fantasy points scored per route run. George Kittle, the only player higher. He was at 0.54. So right there with his hyper efficiency. So, Sammy Watkins, I would fade in a one and done if you didn't use him already. I actually used him last week in my one and dones. So I don't have that decision. I'm not that worried about Tyreek Hill, even though it's a tough matchup and it does put a damper on things. I'm still going to use him. Now, the other side of things at wide receiver is also intriguing. So Deebo Samuel and Emmanuel Sanders. And one of you Rat Packers asked me last week, well, hey, I don't get this. So you're saying that the matchup against the Chiefs secondary is a downgrade, but on the wide receiver cornerback chart, it's showing that it's a slightly favorable matchup. And here's the thing that, if you use a wide receiver cornerback matchup chart at PFF and you just sort by the matchup advantage, that advantage column, because I produced this whole thing. So the advantage column is essentially a combination of a couple factors, but the main factor is receiving grades and coverage grades. And it's the difference between those two, above or below average. So if you have a player who's an above average player, then, they're going to have an advantage in a vacuum over like the average corner. Now, then that advantage is compounded if the corner is below average. This week, obviously, so for somebody like Tyreek Hill, he's above average, but Mosley is also above average, so it's a slight downgrade of a matchup. And it's not just Mosley who he's going to face. He's going to face Sherman and Williams. That's all factored in to the advantage column. This is a long way of saying don't just sort by the advantage column. You have to look to a lot of other factors. So if you look to our fantasy points allowed matchup chart, you're going to see that on the season, Kansas City allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts. That's why it's a bad matchup. Rashad Breeland maybe didn't grade out that well, but wideouts aren't scoring against the Chiefs. And it gets even worse when you look by position. Left receiver, it's the third worst matchup. Right receiver is the worst fantasy matchup. So who plays left, who plays right more often? Deebo plays left more often, Sanders plays right, but it's still bad across the board. I don't like either of them that much this week, but if I have to choose one, it's going to be Deebo. And part of it is the target rate as well. Target rate at 20%, so he's being targeted on a fifth of his routes run. Manny Sanders at 19%, so he's right behind him, but Deebo is being targeted more. The other matchup downgrade in this one goes to Damien Williams, and I don't think that's a huge surprise because of how good the San Francisco run defense was during the season. It's the second worst matchup for running backs. Only the Patriots were a worse matchup this year, but Damien Williams does have appeal because of what I just told you. And he may not get anything done on the ground. It might be a day where he goes 13 for 35 on the ground. But if he catches 4 or 5 balls for an additional 40 yards, say he catches 5 balls for 40 yards and a touchdown, he ends up being a pretty good play. I think they are going to go after the short and intermediate, and that means Damien Williams is going to be used in the passing game. I don't expect to see much of any of the other running backs. Who knows if McCoy dresses? Who knows if Darwin Thompson even sees a touch? It's like over under a half touch for Darwin Thompson. Let's go with the under. I'll talk more about that later in the week, but that's kind of where we are with all of this. So I think your big one and done questions, we won't answer the backfield question with Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman just yet. Your big one and done questions, tight end, I'm going with Kelsey. Honestly, I can't see how you would fade Mahomes if you had Mahomes and Garoppolo left, unless you're in a situation where you really think you have a good read on this game and you really think you can be contrarian and it pays off, because that is the one way that you're going to make up a lot of ground is say Mahomes does get shut down. And it could happen. Anything could potentially happen. And Jimmy G has a pretty good day. You'll make up a lot of ground. It's a game theory play. I'm not making that play. In terms of wideouts, I mean, if you have them all left, obviously Tyreek Hill is in, Debo is in. Are you playing three wideouts? And if it is, then you have to really choose between Sammy Watkins and Manny Sanders if you have them left. If it's not, if you don't have Sammy, if you don't have Sanders, you're going with some of the deep guys. And I think we'll flesh that out as we get into the player props later in the week. Otherwise, I think, that it's really the tight end and the quarterback that'll be the big decisions. So anyway, hopefully you found that beneficial. We'll have an article on this posted at PFF tomorrow, my breakdown. I'll have a few more stats, some more goodies in there for you as well. My rankings are already up. They haven't changed, but I will change them once we get more clarity with Tevin Coleman. And the projections are up over at the site as well. So this week we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday pods. On Wednesday we'll come back and, like I said, more gambling angle stuff. Hopefully a little bit of Tevin Coleman clarity. I'll try and wait as long as I can to get a practice report from them and some player prop stuff as well. In the meantime, PFF.com, PFF30 for 30% off, at Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter and Instagram. All right, I'll catch you on the flip side for another edition of the Pod for PFF. I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.